I've got something pretty interesting to tell you about today, or at least I think it's interesting, and that is Hitler's obsession with holy relics. I am of course playing Heroes and Generals in the background here, which is shaping up pretty nicely. They've put out a new update today, which is why I'm playing it. They've changed all the scopes so that they feel more involved, like you're actually looking down them. Added in a couple of extra weapons, and it's pretty good fun, to be honest. Especially since pretty much every other first-person shooter that seems to have come out recently is either modern or futuristic style things. So it's a really nice change, and it's a free game as well. So you can just try it on Steam. But anyway, I watched yesterday Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it made me wonder if there was any truth to the story behind it. Of course, in that film, Indiana Jones goes after the Germans who are going after the Lost Ark, the Ark that supposedly contains the 10 Commandments God gave to Moses on top of Mount Sinai. As I'm sure you remember from the film, when they open the Ark, it just melts everybody. Apparently only God and Moses are allowed to see God's 10 Commandments. But anyway, it made me wonder because, as much as a lot of the Bible is obviously hearsay, some of it is historically proven to be true. And it made me wonder, since there's so many references to an Ark, whether or not there was actually some truth there, and whether or not Hitler did actually go after it. Because of course Hitler is known to have gone after the Holy Grail. He actually sent squads of SS to go and find the Holy Grail. He supposedly, when they invaded Vienna, took the Spear of Destiny, which is the spear which supposedly stabbed Jesus in his side when he was on the cross, and they also went after Noah's Ark as well. And Hitler really did believe in this kind of occultish power that he would get if he managed to get these holy artifacts that would somehow let him rule the world. There's a reason why games like Castle Wolfenstein are held inside like big medieval castles and cathedrals and stuff. It's because Hitler literally used to hold meetings in these places because he felt it gave them more sort of mysterious power. And he used to have some of them like a round table with his SS around it, like they were kind of knights of the round table. So crazy stuff. But where would Hitler have actually looked for the Ark? Now we know from holy text that supposedly it was created around 1300 BC, when of course Moses went up to collect the 10 Commandments, and shortly after that the 10 Commandments were put into this specially built Ark. And if it were ever made, it suggested that it were made from gold on the outside, then a wood layer next to the gold, and then a layer of gold on the inside. And that's really important, as I'll take in a second to perhaps explain a few things about it. And also on top, it's got 2 cherubim angels, which you can actually see in the Raiders of the Lost Ark film, with their wings touching together, which are also made out of gold. It's worth noting, gold is very good at conducting electricity, and it's also very good at containing radiation. The story continues, of course, that during their 40 years of wandering in the desert, the Israelites were carrying the Ark around, and they basically used it as a kind of battle weapon. For example, they paraded the Ark for 7 days around the walls of the city of Jericho, and the walls, after a shout from the army on the 7th day, fell down because of the Ark. Unfortunately, the Ark was captured from the Israelites by the Philistines, and it ended up in the hands of King Solomon, who built a special temple for it, called the First Temple, on Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And that's where the Ark is kind of lost track of in basically every holy text, because when the Babylonians invaded in 600 BC, and they kept records which, historically proven records of what they raided from Jerusalem, the Ark was not there. So at some point before 600 BC, it got moved somewhere. Now, contemporary knowledge suggests that the 2 most likely places for the Ark to be are either hidden in the hills in a cave somewhere, as the Dead Sea Scrolls were, which actually contained that one of the Dead Sea Scrolls actually contained a list of other caves with treasure in. So they certainly did hide treasure in caves at that time to keep it safe from invading forces. Or the Ark was carried following the Nile down to Ethiopia, because there's a city called Axum in Ethiopia where there's supposedly a chapel which they say holds the Ark. If you do want to know this in a lot more detail than I can cover, by the way, you should read a book by Graham Hancock called The Sign and the Seal. He goes into this in a terrific amount of detail. It's really fascinating read. In fact, you should read any of his books, because he does a lot on the ancient world and such, and theories about more advanced civilizations, things like that. It's really, really interesting. But anyway, this chapel in the grounds of St. Mary of Zion's Church in Ethiopia contains something, definitely. Because there's people assigned, called the Keepers of the Ark, to guard this chapel. They're not allowed to leave the area. And their life expectancy when they get this job is 2 years. They all get cataracts and they all die of radiation poisoning. So there is something in that chapel that they go into to check that's killing them. Now I doubt very much there's actually an Ark inside that temple, but it did make me wonder if there is a scientific explanation that you could apply from like today's knowledge to the Ark that would explain at least some of the stories about it. The first suggestion I heard was that the tablets of stone weren't actually tablets of stone. They were pieces of meteorite found on the top of the mountain, which of course at that time they wouldn't have known what type of rock that actually was. Of course, meteorites can be radioactive, and one of the stories of the Ark is that when it was left open for the public to view, all the people basically who filed past it to view it died shortly afterwards of radiation poisoning. And that could explain that. It doesn't explain how bolts of fire left the Ark and killed people though, like it did in Indiana Jones. And in fact there's a story about a man called Uzzah who was killed when he got too close to the Ark. Several people have suggested, and this is why I mentioned earlier the golden wood structure of the Ark with the two angels on the top, that it's actually a kind of electrical condenser, like a Leyden jar is, so you can actually store static electricity inside it. This would explain why the Ark wasn't allowed to touch the ground, because it would of course then be grounded and lose its electrical charge, and also what the two angels on the top could be, because they could be the positive pole of the circuit. So if static electricity did build up inside it, if you got too close to it, it could theoretically electrocute you, and obviously at that time they didn't know what high voltage was, so they'd have perhaps thought a bolt of fire shot out from God to kill the person who got close to it. What you've got to remember as well is that Moses was an Egyptian prince before he led the Israelites. So if he did exist, he would have had access to the Egyptians' latest technology for that time. And it was perhaps more advanced technology than people think. There's something in a temple in Egypt called the Dendera light, which looks very suspiciously like a light bulb. Now, of course, it might not be, but other things have been found to show knowledge of electricity. There's something called the Baghdad battery, which almost certainly was used to electroplate other things, so they perhaps knew more than people give them credit for today. Graham Hancock actually wrote a book on this called Fingerprint of the Gods, and the premise of which it seems well researched, to be honest, that 11,500 years ago a massive meteorite, and it was the Ice Age then, so all of North America all the way down to Mexico was covered in a mile thick of ice. A meteorite hit that and just caused massive flooding across the planet, and it's the reason places like Indonesia and Australia are not connected together, because before that period they actually were, but this flooding caused all of that to be wiped out, and there's tons of structures just underwater if you go diving there, which have obviously been covered from the sea from all these ancient civilizations. It's where Atlantis, which Plato funnily enough referred to as being 11,500 years ago, supposedly disappeared too as well. So there is perhaps some truth that as these civilizations got wiped out, their technology got lost. Because the thing is, without a central point of knowledge, like the internet, if your civilization gets wiped out by a tidal wave, and you haven't travelled anywhere else to spread that knowledge is gone forever. And there are things like the Antikythera mechanism, which from 100 BC, which is an analog computer that old, which suggests people knew an incredible amount at that time, and perhaps some of it was lost. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Heroes and Generals is a good bit of fun, and I don't think Hitler fortunately did find the Ark, because if he did, we'd all be German right now. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next chapter.